So last but most certainly not least, we are here with Dr. Iain Kerr, Chief Executive Officer of Ocean Alliance and Director of the Snotbot program.
Yeah, Dr. Kerr, thank you so much for being here today to share what the Snotbot program is. We're so excited for your presentation. So without further ado, let's just dive right in.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You know, Ocean Alliance is a group that does what we call conservation biology. So we collect data so that we can change laws to help preserve wildlife. You know, there are other groups that collect data just for the sake of collecting data, but we do it so we can help policymakers and educators impact laws. And me personally, I've been very interested in what human threats endanger whales, because if we can identify the human threats, we can then mitigate them, okay? Now, believe it or not, I and many of my peers have spent much of my life chasing down animals with a biopsy gun and then shooting a dart in them to do a health assessment. And you've probably seen it with rhinos or elephants or whatever. So I would say to you two ladies, after this, we're going to have a little demo and I'm going to chase you down the road with the biopsy gun. And you're going to tell me whether or not you feel stressed by the whole process. I mean, so what all I'm basically saying is, if you actually think about it, the way we've been doing health assessments has really not been the best way to do it. And in fact, there's two names they use. One they call the observer effect, where they say the act of collecting the data can change the data, or the other one, the technical name is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Now, there's another issue here too, particularly as you speak to endangered species, or you think of endangered species, there tend to be two camps, okay? And camp number one says, we mustn't do anything to this species that might hasten its demise, okay? But camp number two says, no, 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 we need to collect all the data we can. We need to be invasive so we can save the species, okay? And what we've done with the Snotbot program is come up with option number three, or camp number three, whereby we can actually collect biological health data without the animals knowing. So imagine you go into your doctor's office, you sit down, you open up your favorite magazine, you read for a few minutes, and the doctor comes out and says, you know what, David, you're super healthy, your blood pressure is great, your cholesterol's down. All right, mate, off you go. How cool would that be? And it will be happening at some point. That's almost the equivalent of what we're doing with whales. And how does this work? Well, whales are what we call explosive breathers, okay? And it's almost like when we sneeze. So when we're talking, we're probably talking at 3 to 5 miles an hour. You know, I might be talking a little bit faster, but with 3 to 5 miles an hour as the air is coming out. When we sneeze, we're probably anywhere from 60 to 100 miles an hour. And whales have been clocked from 100 to 200 miles an hour when they, because they're explosive breathing. And as you know, our lungs are made up of all these little bags called alveoli, and these bags are expanding and contracting, and they all have a little bit of liquid over it, which is like a lubricant. And that lubricant is helping the gaseous exchange between the blood and the air, but also when those whales exhale, they're peeling off a little bit of this lubricant and whatever else is in their lungs. And because they're going out at such a pressure, it's actually what we call exhaled breath condensate. So the air is condensating outside as they've blown it out under pressure. So those aren't actually clouds of salt water. It's just the air that's being shot out under pressure condensating. And guess what? They're throwing up all this priceless biological information. Well, what is that information? Well, genetics, okay, which is male, female, you know, am I related to this? What's the health of the population? What's the health? Is that my brother, my sister? Or, you know, we learn so much with genetics. And then microbiomes. I'm sure you're all into probiotics, you know, and I don't want to ask, but maybe at some point you've been asked to pee in a cup by a doctor. That's because they're looking at your microbiomes. And when you're unwell, some of the positive microbiomes can run a little bit rampant and become negative. Do you know what I mean? So we've got the microbiomes. And then the hormones. Just from the exhalation, we can say, again, is this a male? Is it female? Is she fertile? Is she pregnant? Is she lactating? Just from the whale snot. And the jewel in the crown, we're not quite there yet, is stress hormones. So I want to be able to say, is some activity that's going on right now stressing this animal? The problem with the stress hormone is it's almost a quantitative issue. So, if your stress hormone's a little high, you're stressed. If it's a little low, you're normal. So we don't know how much hormone is in the blow, how much of the blow we're collecting. Do you know what I mean? So what indicates what is stress? So what we're doing right now is we're doing what we call biomarker assays, where, for example, we're looking at urea. So we know levels of urea quite well. So we're looking at the levels of urea in the blow to see if we can use that to help us validate the levels of the hormones, okay? And the other fantastic thing is, again, if I wanted to design a model for a way to study a whale, okay, the worst way to do it would be getting in a small boat. I mean, if you think about it, if you're studying a rhino, okay, it doesn't throw a bucket of water at you and then dive beneath the Serengeti and appear 5 miles away. You know what I mean? So studying whales is just not easy. And getting up in the air, suddenly looking down, you can see through the water, you can see how they're interacting. We actually use a laser altimeter to let me know exactly how high I am. And if I know how high I am, and I know the focal plane of a camera, I can actually work out how big the animals are. And then suddenly I could see, wait a minute, David doesn't seem to like that animal or whatever, or Katie, or you know what I mean? So we're seeing all these incredible things with these tools. And last but not least on this, oceanography has really long been almost a prerogative of the privileged. These big research vessels and, $1 million submarines and all this type of gear. And we need those types of vessels, but, we live on planet ocean. 71% of the planet is ocean. And in fact, some of the largest shorelines in the world, whether it be Africa, South America, are some of the nations that don't have the resources of, let's say, North America or Europe. So we need to be getting these people affordable tools. And guess what? My favorite drone is $2,000. Now, you might think 2,000 is quite a lot. In the oceanography field, $2,000 is not really a lot of money. And in fact, a Snotbot field season probably cost me about 60 grand, but that's 5 people going to Africa, collecting all this data, as to say, video, photo ID, thermal, and hormones, DNA, genetics. I mean, it's incredible, all the data we're collecting. And we're collecting it was a $2,000 drone. And if that drone falls in the water, the expedition isn't over. I've been on expeditions with people where they had a $20,000 piece of gear that was lost. And they're like, okay, that's it. We got to go home now. And years of planning and all the money to get you out there and do the work is sort of lost. So I think drones are democratizing oceanography. And I also feel, I would say to all of you, it's also opening the doors to the potential of people being more involved in saving the world. And I would say to all of you and all of your students, if you're an artist, if you're an engineer, if you're a mathematician, if you're a poet, do you know what I mean? You can now turn all of these skills. If you're a lawyer, you can turn or want to be a lawyer, you can turn all of these skills into helping the environment. You don't have to be an old fart like me wearing a white coat with a couple of pens in there and talking in a language that nobody understands. The new economy of the environment is going to be more people just doing something, which is really important because I hate to be rude, even all of us on this call, our consumerism at some level is in part responsible for the degradation of the wild world. So if everybody could take a little bit more responsibility rather than a few people taking a lot of responsibility, it's going to change the world. So thank you for the invitation. I hope that all makes sense. And yeah, let's see if I can answer a couple of questions.
Yeah, of course. No, that was very intriguing. I know that the people watching this are going to enjoy it. Katie and I were enjoying it. I even heard Mr. B laughing at some point, so I'm sure that he enjoyed it. But one of the most important things that I think I've noticed with all of our speakers so far is we're talking about how science is always changing, specifically when it comes to the oceans. And I know that you mentioned it too. There's new technology, there's new ways of approaching things. But way back at the beginning of your career, how did you first become interested in researching whales, and what attracted you to this program? And have those reasons changed with the times, or have they kind of stayed the same?
Okay, can I pass on that one and you can ask me an easy question? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. The bad news is a little bit, because I don't think I have a model that people could necessarily follow, but I'm also a little bit of a master of nothing, but I'm good at a lot of different things. And it made me very frustrated because my friends were really good at physics and they were going to be this, and my other friends were really good at biology and they were going to do that. And I was like okay at biology and I was okay at physics. And I just happened to be hitchhiking around South America, believe it or not. And I met this fellow called Roger Payne on a beach in Argentina. And at that point, and Roger Payne was a little bit of a rock star because he's the guy that discovered that whales sing songs. Now, I didn't know this, and I didn't know who Roger Payne was. And they were doing some experiment, and I just like turned up at the beach and I was watching them. And I was like, well, I wouldn't do it that way. And this whole group of people like looked at me like, who would say that to Roger Payne? And but I didn't know. I wasn't rude. But, you know, you can tell a good leader because rather than Roger saying to me, you know, piss off, he was like, well, how would you do it then? And all I remember is, I don't even remember what it was, but my idea worked. And then Roger said, no, who are you again? Or why are you here? What's going on? And then about 6 months later, he actually said, I used to have a captain's license. And he said, I need somebody to captain a boat to the Galapagos and I can't pay him or her. Would you do the job? And I did. And you know, and I've been very lucky. But you know, you asked about sort of do some of the same ideals move forward. I think in many ways, and I apologize if you heard this before, it's probably more about following your passion. You know what I mean? Now the bad news is I spend an awful lot of my time, and I bet David's like this, I spend an awful lot of my time writing reports, writing grants, and raising money. And I actually don't enjoy any of those three things. But the reality is, you know, I followed my passion and I was doing things I wanted to do. And I was convinced that someday I would find a job where I could be an educator, I could be a scientist, and I could be an innovator. And, you know, it's taken me a while. And I think, you know, I would almost say, anyway, I think that's it at this point. Just follow your passion, you know, and it's hard to go wrong if you do that. And I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And like, that's great advice as well. Like, I know, you know, it's really important to follow what you really enjoy and like your passion, especially. So our next question is, what were your favorite classes in high school or college?
Oh, man. Oh, boy. I tell you, okay. All right, let me think about this. You know, I'm at that age now when they didn't have high schools, you know, the dinosaurs lined up and then when we were chipping out of, you know, but yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, you know, I think it was anything. And you know, it's funny. I wish somebody had asked me this question 20 years ago, you know, so good on you. I think it was probably, again, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, the classes where I felt I could do the most. So truth be said, you know, I almost like biology maybe when we were doing dissection, because I was good at making things and good with my hands. Do you know what I mean? So, but I struggle because, again, I sort of set you up for this one, but I sort of liked everything, but I wasn't great at any of them. You know, it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but most people are like maybe a little bit better at this, a little bit better at that, and I really wasn't, which I thought was a challenge. But I would almost say to kids as well today, I think being a generalist is a really good thing nowadays. I almost to the earlier question, I think the world has changed where we wanted art over there and science over there. And I don't think that's the case anymore with the internet and the way things are changing. Having a capacity to do a number of different things, you can certainly be better at these things, is a good skill to have. And I would recommend, you know, adaptability. And I would also recommend too, you know, spending a little bit more time on the things you struggle with, you know, just to make sure you're well-rounded in your skill set. Don't just spend all the time doing what you want to do, you know?
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And going off of what you were saying, I know that you mentioned following your passions and working on things that are difficult. And those could be applied to almost anyone, regardless of what field they want to go into. But specifically for any students watching this that may have an interest in marine biology or going into work similar to what you do, is there any specific advice that you would give them for going into this career and beyond?
I mean, I think um, the opportunities are far greater than you would potentially realize. You know what I mean? So I almost wanted to say do the research, but I don't mean that rudely. I don't mean go out and do oceanographic research. Just look at all the different careers, and actually nobody told me that. I did grow up in a small town in England, but nobody told me that. I had no idea people drove ROVs and people built robotic arms and people looked at whale poo and people looked at phytoplankton and people looked at hot thermal vents. And you know what I mean? I think that I would almost guarantee it would be hard to find a person and sort of show them everything that's going on in our oceans, whether it be sustainable ecosystems and harvesting and aquaculture and mining or whatever. Do you know what I mean? I think there's such a spectrum of jobs and opportunity there that, you know, I don't want to say it's like a dating game, that you guarantee there will be a match for you out there. And don't try to fit a square peg in a round hole. I mean, I have a little problem because, and David will understand this, and maybe you've heard of it, but you can bring it up. But in my business, we call it the Cousteau syndrome. And we all grew up watching Jacques Cousteau, and, you know, he had the French accent, and they got in the submarines and we dive with the great whales, and everybody wanted to be Jacques Cousteau, but Jacques was just doing this. Do you know what I mean? And we didn't realize that the world, that the opportunities were there. And by the way, you know, in my earlier comment, sort of when I was talking about the rhinos and I said how difficult oceanography is, back to your mindset again. You know, I drive my staff crazy because someone says, yeah, you can't use a thermal camera on a whale. And I'm like, we can? Why not? That's difficult. Difficult is an opportunity. Difficult means less people are doing it. Do you know what I mean? And there are two ways that science goes. And I don't want to say I'm a cheater, but most science is sort of incremental. Do you know what I mean? We do this, we do that a little bit better. The submarine can go a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper. We can get slightly bigger samples, slightly bigger samples. I like this idea of trying to think outside the box. And I think your generation don't even know what the blooming box is, which is good. You know what I mean? But I was trained to think in a certain way. And as soon as you're trained to think in a way, that becomes a limitation. So don't limit yourselves. Again, I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but I'm trying to sort of get it out there, because I think there are enormous opportunities in sort of the new blue economy. And again, I'll be very blunt. When I came up with Snotbot, almost everybody was against it. They didn't like the name. They didn't like the concept. They thought it was stupid and drones and whatever. And on one level, Snotbot has been the most successful program in my organization's career, because the name, which some people have said I'm sort of denigrating science, but hey, kids love Snot. I mean, you can't hear about Snotbot and not remember it. So in sort of market penetration and name recognition, I mean, literally, I was just talking with a coffee company that actually want to do some work with us with regard. I mean, how cool is that, you know? So if somebody, you know, look for the opportunities potentially when someone else is being negative, you know, because you can either marginally increase, which is great, or you can try doing it a different way. And if you do it a different way, you will make mistakes. And I've made more than most, but it can be a more interesting journey. And sometimes that's where the great leaps and the great understanding comes from. So great questions.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic advice, especially for our young girls that are watching this who may want to go into STEM. Just that idea that people are going to say no to you, but there's more out there for you to do, and there is a place for you in this field. But
Absolutely.
I guess my final question is, since we do have students watching these, I know that you mentioned that we're all contributing to the problem with our oceans right now. What are some little things that we can do to try and make this crisis a bit better?
Right. Well, I mean, I'm going to dig deep here and start at a very fundamental level, okay? And the first thing I think is understanding we as humans have one thing we have control over. And it's pretty funny. My 9-year-old daughter thought I was talking about the TV remote. And I'm not talking about the TV remote. It's actually your own mind. At the end of the day, you make the decision, or you decide not to do something, either voluntarily or involuntarily. So first of all, I think we got to be very careful. We like to blame the oil companies, or we like to blame the plastic companies. Yet I fly around in an airplane, I drive a car. So for me, you know, guess what? You're talking to a hypocrite. I mean, I don't have any plastic on my table, but accept the fact that we're living in this real world. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't like the people that say you're sort of black or white. Do you know what I mean? Where, because you know, it's just impossible to live then, you know. And then I was at a conference and I picked up a plastic bottle without sort of thinking of, and people were, you know, okay, we're gonna make mistakes, but understand at the end of the day, we are responsible. So that's point number one. Point number two is understanding the value of doing small things. You know what I mean? People are like, okay, I'm never going to wear leather again, or I'm never going to drink out of plastic again. And you know what? You set yourself an unobtainable goal, and then you fail, and then you feel disempowered, and then you're like, oh, what the hell? And you sort of give up. Do you know what I mean? So I even say this with people that are intern and volunteering. They always come to me and say, I can do all 10 filing cabinets. And I'm like, okay, here's the deal. Let's just set the goal at 5. If you do 10, I'll be happy, but let's set the goal at 5. So, you know, to people, I would say, okay, you know what? Let's really try to recycle a little bit more this week, or let's really try to use less plastic. You know what I mean? Let's just try, you know, to get an organic shampoo. You know, I think if you're just trying and doing little things, and if you're making mistakes, that's fine. If you buy the wrong one, that's fine. If you poke your parents to try to get them to change a little bit, that's good too. But understand the value of small things, because if everybody just did something, we wouldn't have a problem, you know. And last but not least, I would say find a charity. And I would suggest a smaller charity, because you know how it is. It's like you give $10 to one of these giant charities. So probably never know. But find a small charity and say, hey, you know what? I'll give $5 a month. You know, it's the price of a Starbucks. But, you know, if 1,000 people gave me, my charity, $5,000 a month, you know, total, that is enough for me to hire another staff member. You know what I mean? So, and I'm not suggesting you give to me, but understand, you know, we sort of try to do some action and either volunteer for a charity. But even if you volunteer, don't say, okay, I'm volunteering every week. Set yourself attainable goals, and then you'll feel good. The charity will feel good. From my end, in fact, it doesn't. There's a British gentleman that said this quote that technically it's a bit sexist, but you'll have to forgive me. But he said, Edmund Burke, he said, nobody did worse than he who did nothing for fear they could only do a little. You know what I mean? Understand, you know, if somebody gives me $1, you know what? That's $1 I don't have to raise. That's $1 I can put to the environment. You know what I mean? And anyway, so there we go. Thank you.
Well, thank you for doing this with us. I know I greatly appreciated it. And speaking on behalf of the Mate Department, we most certainly appreciated it. And I know our students watching this are going to appreciate it. You are such an interesting guy, and you are very clearly know what you're talking about. So thank you so much.
Well, I mean, no, my pleasure. I mean, you know, it's very kind. David has been good to me, and we've had a number of conversations in the past. And thank you for inviting me, because that shows an interest on your part. So I wish you all the best. And you know, David can follow up with any questions or whatever. Always happy to help. So keep up the good work.